Our Bible reading, this is the assigned gospel reading for this morning. It comes from Luke chapter 16. It's Jesus telling a strange little story to his disciples, a parable. So Jesus said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a money manager, and charges were brought to him that this manager was mismanaging his accounts, squandering his property. So he summoned to him and said, what is this I'm hearing about you? Give me an accounting of the management and then be on your way. You can't work for me any longer. And so the manager said to himself, what am I going to do now that I don't have this job any longer? I'm not strong enough to dig ditches. I'm too proud to beg. I know what I will do so that once I've lost this job, people will still want me to come to their houses and treat me well. So what he did was he summoned all the people who owed money to his boss. He sat down with him. He said to the first one, what do you owe? How much do you owe my master? And the man said, I owe him 100 jugs of olive oil. And he said, okay, well, let's take your bill and make it 50. And then he called the next one and said, so what do you owe my master? And he said, well, I owe him 100 containers of wheat. He sat down and said, all right, let's look at this. Make it 80. And he did this with all of those who owed money and goods. And so his boss commended, it says his boss commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Jesus says, for the children of this age are shrewder in dealing with their own than are the children of light. I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it's gone, they might welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. Whoever is dishonest in a very little is going to be dishonest in much. So if you've not been faithful with dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters, because they'll either hate the one and love the other, or be totally devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. This is the story and Jesus' explanation of it. And it's a complicated story. So I'll tell another story about my mom. When I was a kid, maybe they know this too, my mom was omniscient. Or at least that's what it seemed like. Two examples, both of them involving candy. We had a friend who was close enough with my mom that we referred to her as our aunt. Aunt Phyllis Sturman. We always said all three, Aunt Phyllis Sturman, like that was the full name, the whole name, to distinguish her from my dad's sister, Phyllis. We had two aunts, Aunt Phyllis's. I was young enough that I don't entirely remember the details. I think she was a college friend of my mom's. Perhaps they'd known each other even longer. Anyhow, Aunt Phyllis Sturman I have to do that now. Aunt Phyllis Sturman ran a little store in one of the local malls, that was a gourmet coffee and candy shop. I can almost, in my memory, pull up the smell of that shop, which was like walking in through the back door of heaven somehow when you went in. It just smelled so good. And one day my mom needed something in the mall, took us there, left us in the store for a few minutes under Aunt Phyllis Sturman's care. And she knew that she was going to give us a little candy, but she gave us clear directions. Do not eat candy until after dinner. You put it away and wait until we get home. And so my brother and I, naturally obedient, stepped outside of the store, still technically within sight of Aunt Phyllis, and we each ate just one piece. Take it out, put it in your mouth, chew it up, swallow, yum, all done. Nobody's any the wiser. Mom came back, and she knew right away Because, like I said, omniscient. Maybe also because we were both still licking our lips to get the bit of the chocolate off, but probably the omniscience. The second time is a little more embarrassing because this time not only was I dumb, but I was also a thief. We were in the Giant grocery store. That was the chain where we grew up in Maryland, the Giant. These were the days when they still had bulk bins because we weren't so afraid of what people were putting in on the hands. And some of those bulk bins contained candy. One of those candy bulk bins had chocolate peanut butter cups, wrapped in little paper. So my brother and I liberated a couple of them, not many, just enough to kind of scratch that candy itch. And we were really discreet about it this time. We had learned our lessons. Don't lick lips in front of Mom. She'll know. So we were discreet as preteens are about these things, which means that we waited until we were standing in the checkout line with Mom before we tried to sneak them into our mouths. And somehow, she busted us because omniscient, like I said. This is what we had to do in that instance. We had to confess to the cashier, who then on the spot had to just assign a value to each of the candies. I think she said, I don't know, maybe a dime, which my mom then paid to her for each of the candies we had stolen, and we had to repay her when we got home. Because my mother, in spite of having grown up in a religiously devout household, in spite of having gone to a religious boarding school, in spite of playing the organ every Sunday at the church that we grew up in, so I know she was hearing sermons every week, did not respect the teachings of Jesus. Because if she did, she would have known that the correct course of action for us to do was to steal as many of the candies as we could so that we could take them and make friends with them. Jesus is confusing sometimes, is what I mean. This strange little story about a money manager who loses his job for doing it poorly or maybe, probably, dishonestly, it's a hard one to untangle. The boss tells him he's got word of his financial mismanagement, so he's got to settle accounts and then get on down the road, or wherever money managers went in the first century. So he hatches a plan. There are some scholars who think that the plan in the story is that, well, he would just sit down and scratch out his own commission. He would just give sacrifice a little bit of his own present financial gain in order to make his future a little easier. But you kind of think that if that's what Jesus was telling in the story, that he would have just said that. And he doesn't. It probably would have been obvious, and it's not. So it just really sounds like the guy flat out cheats his boss, who's left then with no recourse but to shake his head and smile and congratulate the guy for his chutzpah, for getting himself out of this situation. Because what he's done is create a circumstance in which now the boss has lost money, but he looks really generous. And it's hard to go back on that, because that's a real hit to your reputation. I'm not sure that the lesson we want to take away from this story is that we should steal as much as we can from rich people and their businesses. Maybe. Maybe it's that we should steal from them in a way that makes it hard for them to punish us. Or maybe that's not quite the thing we should take away from it. It's hard not to see in this story that Jesus really distrusts wealth and probably the means by which people accumulate it. Different Bible translations handle the phrasing differently. But across the board, the idea comes through. This passage talks about either dishonest wealth or tainted money, or my favorite is a contemporary Bible translation that still sounds just stubbornly old-fashioned. Filthy lucre is the way that they put it. Whatever phrasing they choose, across the board, it's clear that Jesus is suspicious of wealth, which fits in with a lot of other things that we read in the Gospels. At one point, he sends out his disciples to go spread the message, and he tells them to go with empty pockets. Don't look wealthy, actually go out poor and rely on the generosity of other people. The prayer that he teaches us is one that tells us to ask for our daily bread. Not all of the bread, not as much bread as we can hoard in our pantries. Just ask for our daily bread. He breaks a rich man's heart by telling him that the key to eternal life is for him to sell his possessions and give the money to the poor. He tells another parable about a wealthy landowner who is already wealthy and then is so delighted at how his wealth will increase that he says, I'm going to rip down my old barn, build a much larger one so I can store up all my wealth. And that very night, before he can even draw up a blueprint, he drops dead. Jesus is hard on wealth. At the same time, he has wealthy people in his orbit. You know, he sent the disciples out poor, but he wanted them to rely on generosity of other people's wealth. Wealthy people gave him a place to stay in all his travels. They hosted meals where he could have people come and talk with him. They helped to fund his ministry. Maybe one thing that he's doing in this strange little story is naming the tragic side of what it is to be human in society, which is to say that we're always implicated in systems that cause harm to ourselves and to other people. We're all tied to extractive economies. There is no state of purity, even for the most conscientious of us. I got here by driving in a Prius, but it still burned gas. Even in our switch to sustainable economy and renewable resources, we're having to extract precious metals from the earth. And a lot of that extraction is happening in places and on lands that are sacred to indigenous people and in ways that are exploiting the labor of those who are doing the extracting. There is not a way for us to be pure in this. Even things that come out of our best impulses and call forth the better angels of our nature, they say, those are tainted. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have those animals here. Horses out on the lawn, the people bringing their cats and their dogs. Maybe some dogs will come sing to us in singing group, or cats will get around. There's a whole genre of novelty songs about animals getting loose in church, that sort of thing. Some people will bring pictures of their pets. And what we always do is bless them and remind ourselves that they bless us, and we celebrate the mutual love that grows between human beings and animals. They call to our noble impulses, and that is fantastic. They make us generous. And recent report dug into the climate impact of our domesticated cats and dogs, and they are not carbon neutral, much as I try to stop the little scamps from burning coal in the house. We're compromised. Again, even the most conscientious of us. And maybe the parable is an invitation to wrestle with that and figure out what to do even though we're compromised. I love that this congregation has enough crafters in it. Joy Berge, crafting over there. I love that we're having monthly gatherings where crafters are getting together and crafting with each other. And Joy's coming up with brainstorming, scheming, a fundraising activity with all of these crafts. But it's a way to get together and resist the impulse to reduce everything to dollar value. right? I love that there are fantastic gardeners here who garden for the sheer beauty of it and who also create and share food out of it. Again, pushing back against the reduction of everything in our world to dollar values. And we are still compromised. Even us good liberal folks, sometimes we're the folks who need to wrestle the most with the fact that we are compromised. Here's something that one of our denominations has done recently that I think is an illustration of how we can wrestle productively with that, to use dishonest wealth for eternal goals, to use Jesus' language. This is about the United Methodist Church. So the United Methodist Church, like most denominations, has investments. Every denomination's got investments. This congregation has two pools of investment. We've got two endowments, one that generates interest and dividends to help with the upkeep of the building, one that generates interest and dividends that will help us engage and support the arts. And we know who we are as a congregation. A lot of folks who are a part of us here on Zoom in the room have investments of their own to support retirement. Those investments are part of a larger economic system in which people and land get exploited. The investments can be screened, for instance, to not support the fossil fuel industries or weapons industries or tobacco industries, etc. They can avoid some of the worst and most blatant harms that are caused. But they're still compromised. They can also be strategic. So this is what the United Methodist Church did in August. They divested any and all government bonds from nations that are maintaining prolonged illegal military occupations, which means that the United Methodist Church no longer holds government bonds that supports the governments of Morocco, which has occupied the Western Sahara for decades. They no longer have bonds from Turkey, which occupies northern Cyprus, and they no longer hold government bonds from Israel due to the occupation of Gaza. The decision that the denomination made to put this forth says this, I quote, "The United Nations has identified flagrant human rights violations in all of these occupations, including land confiscation, theft of natural resources, home demolitions, and illegal colonization, deprivation of food and water, violence against civilians, mass incarceration for population control, and brutality against children." So the denomination has $26 billion in an investment portfolio, which is not anything to blink at. And that portfolio will no longer include bonds that support governments engaged in these activities until those situations are remedied. It's the first denomination to do so, which I think is important to name because historically our relationship with the United Methodist Church has been so conflicted. We've got to raise up something brave and pioneering and courageous that they've done. Strategy is what it is. Or as Jesus put it, shrewdness. We're tangled in the webs of the systems we live inside. We can and should find ways to resist them when they cause harm. And we can never fully extract ourselves from that harm or from them. Most of us in this congregation, at least to some degree, have or will have wealth. Dishonest wealth, tainted money, filthy lucre, whichever one you want to choose. If we're compromised already, one response we could have is just to be fatalistic, shrug our shoulders and say, well, then I guess it doesn't matter. There's not a whole lot I can do. That doesn't seem to be the lesson of the story, nor do I think it's the impulse or the desire of folks who are part of this congregation. Because where's the fun in that? The other choice is to find ways, even inside of it, to get around it. to take part in mutual aid that supports people in need, to indulge in the joys of generosity, share out all the candy. Maybe we can take the advice of Methodism's founder, John Wesley, who said, earn all you can, save all you can, give away all you can, and really lived by that. He said that if he died with more than, I think it was 15 pounds, and I don't know what British pounds in the 1700s were worth, but he said if he died with more than 15 pounds in his accounts, his life would have been a failure. And he died with 15 pounds. He gave it all away. Maybe, like the money manager in the parable, we can find creative ways of turning the harmful systems against themselves to create some good. And in there is God's goodness. Amen.